Hey guys, Becca, VP's Garage here. Today we're looking at installing the Hyundai Veloster N GTS lowering springs from Arc Performance. These also do fit on the second generation Veloster turbo models. MSRP as shown there on the screen cap. They do for the next 2 weeks have an anniversary sale running, so it's a pretty good time to buy. If you guys are interested in learning more about these springs, as well as watching a few installation clips, just stay tuned. For specifications, you're looking at approximately a 1.25 inch drop on the front and a 1.15 inch drop on the rear for the Veloster N model. Alright, so first things first, we have removed the wheel to expose obviously your strut tower and your whole brake setup. At this point, we are using a 17 and a 19 millimeter to remove the knuckle bolts. We're using the breaker bar on one side and then our impact drill on the other side. The top bolt came out a lot smoother than the bottom one, but if you were to either place the jack on the bottom or just hold the whole housing when you go to take the second one out, it would likely make it a lot easier than as you see me struggling trying to wiggle it out. So just a quick close-up of the knuckle, the two bolts that were removed, top and bottom, and then this is what you're left with. Alright, so next we're looking at removing this nut off of the sway bar link to disconnect it from the strut tower. We're using a 17 millimeter socket to do this. Alright, so we're actually trying to remove the sway bar from the strut tower currently. It ended up being a little bit of a pain in the butt. Took some fidgeting around with both our little pry bar and bringing the jack up and down, and eventually it did come loose. Alright, next we're looking at both the brake line housing and the sensor housing from the electronic dampening system that the Veloster N has. So we go ahead and remove both of those bolts. I believe one was a 12 millimeter and the other one was a 14 millimeter. Once removed, the housings will just flap around as shown, and then we look to disconnect all of the clips of the sensors. We found it easiest to disconnect these clips using a small flathead screwdriver and just kind of prying them out. We didn't have any brake, but just be careful. Depending on how much buildup you have in your wheel wells, they could be a bit stuck on. Once you have the sensors all disconnected, you can go to the top of the strut tower and remove the 3 bolts, which I believe are 14 millimeters, to allow the strut tower to come out. Alright, now that the strut itself is out, we are using our spring compressors to compress the spring so that we can safely remove it once we take the top hat off. Now I highly suggest that you either invest in a set of these if you're expecting to change out your lowering springs often, or rent them. A lot of stores, Canadian Tire locally here, as well as Princess Auto, other places will rent them. All you do is put a down payment and you get that money back once you return them. Safety first, guys. Alright, once we have safely compressed the springs, you can remove the rubber grommet on the top of the top hat and use a 19 millimeter socket with our impact drill to slowly remove the nut from the top of the top hat. At this point, you can remove the top hat if you stand the strut tower up and then slowly bring the spring off of the whole strut tower. If Pelmen had have listened to me in the beginning, he would have realized how much easier it is if you just take the top hat off first. Listen to your ladies' boys. And ta-da! Just like that. Magic. Alright, at this point you're looking to decompress your spring compressors on your OEM set of springs so that you can use these on your new set of springs to install them back on your strut tower. Slow and steady. Alright, once your new lowering spring has been compressed, you're going to grab your strut tower and you're going to place your spring back in where the foam padding shows for it to line up. You are then going to continue tightening the spring compressors if required in order to fit the top hat on with the top of the bolt sticking out far enough in order to screw on the nut. We found with these specific spring compressors, we basically had to have them completely compressed in order to get the top hat to fit on. Once you've tightened the springs down enough to get the top hat on, you can go ahead and tighten that bolt at the very top using a 19mm. Once you've tightened down that top bolt, you can go ahead and start decompressing your springs until you're able to get the spring compressors off safely. At this point, we are reinstalling the strut tower, so you can bring it over, have somebody both in the wheel well and up on top to help line up the bolts. Once you have the 3 bolts tightened back on, you're going to use the jack to lift the knuckle back up to meet the strut tower in order to put those bolts back on. At this point, we only just hand tighten them. After we put the sway bar link back on, we do actually tighten them with our impact drill. So now we're looking to reconnect the sway bar link onto the strut tower and pop it right back into place. When removing and reattaching this, just be careful not to strip the actual bolt side of it. We did have a bit of a issue trying to get this nut back on, and we really had to hammer down with the drill to get it to tighten. As mentioned here, we are actually tightening down those knuckle bolts. And last but not least, we are going to tighten the 3 bolts on top as well as the top hat bolt on the top of the strut tower. Alright, same as the front spring, of course, you're starting off removing your wheel. Next, you'll look to your rear lower arm, which is where Aaron is working currently in the video. We started with the bolt in the middle, but I would highly suggest starting with the bolt farthest in, which is the smallest one. After taking the middle one out, we found it was a bit difficult to get the farthest one out. To get the smaller bolts out, we found using our little pry bar worked the best. After that bolt was out, we moved on to the very frontmost bolt. To get this bolt out, we found using the jack at varying heights, both dropping and raising it, we were able to twist the bolt out just using our hands. With that bolt out, you can go ahead and lower the jack, which will lower the rear lower arm, and it'll give you access to the rear spring. As you can see, it was easier if one person held it down and the second person pulled the actual spring out of place. Now with the spring out of place, you can go ahead and replace it with your new lowering springs. Ensure you remove the rubber bushing on the OEM spring and you replace that onto the new lowering springs that you are swapping in. At this point, you basically just do everything that you just did backwards. Once again, we found it particularly more difficult to put the farthest bolt back in, the smallest one. With some hammering and some wiggling on the joint there, we were able to finally get it to pop into place.